This is why you should write the stories that are true to your experiences. My writing journey since childhood has been pretty solid. I've written almost every day for the last, 30 years. And I've always been consistent. I've always turned to pen and turned to paper to write. Because I've written so much, especially since I was a kid, I began to harness the power of writing. I began to harness the rules. I started to listen to the rules, and I started to analyze my work and critique my work as well. And I could also tell what was a good story and what was a bad story, what was too sensationalist, what was too boring, and what was too stereotypical. So I primarily wrote fantasy. I love writing fantasy. Fantasy was something I understood, and fantasy was something that came easily to me. The genre for me was the easiest to write. Obviously, I got into adulthood and I started to work in the corporate world, but I quickly grew very sick of it. It was very, very greedy. It was a very toxic place, and I was surrounded by people who were entirely non-creative. They were very profit motivated. There was no room for creativity. Even when you spoke to your colleagues, there wasn't much about creativity there. It was more about money, shopping, drinking, socializing, that sort of thing. So for me, eventually, it became a very toxic workplace. Now, the benefits of working in the corporate world was it made me lean into my creativity a lot more. I started writing a lot more, and I gradually began to seriously consider writing as a career rather than a hobby. And obviously this meant propositioning publishers, agents, everyone in that world, and also hiring people to look over my work first to ensure my work was up to scratch. I believe that I would be very welcome in the writing world because a lot of Nigerian greats, we have Chinua Achebe, Ben Okri, there were so many, there's Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, she's currently around, very famous writer. So there were a lot of Nigerian writers on the ground already. They had exemplary work. And I thought, well, I'm a Nigerian writer as well, so surely there should be some sort of interest in my work. Now, I will add that these writers were very literary, but I thought it'll be fine. And that was where I made the wrong assumptions. So I pitched to publishers and agents. I finally started speaking to one publisher who put me in touch with an agent. And when they realized I was Nigerian, they got very excited. However, when they realized I wrote fantasy, and I wanted to write fantasy, and I wasn't a literary author at all, they became more disinterested, they became more dissatisfied. They said they didn't want fantasy from me, they wanted something more contemporary. For me, it was a bit of an odd suggestion because your work is your work. That's what you're able to do easily and confidently. But I thought, why not try and write something more contemporary and further away from the fantasy sphere? So I ended up writing this series, Coates. Coates is a dark academia series about children in a boarding school, a very elite UK boarding school. And I knew it was a good series because I'd actually previously written it and I'd had a friend read it. And my friend had been so eager to read the final book, which I sort of delayed upon. So I knew it was a strong series and there were some really memorable characters in it. And a lot of readers would be able to resonate with it. So I would classify it as contemporary, but it was dark academia. I presented this to the agent, and their response was very odd because they just didn't want that. And then I began to realize that it wasn't about the work. That I realized then and there that I had been put into a box and I was supposed to fit into that box and either write literary Nigerian tales or write stereotypical stories about, maybe the struggle or, it either had to be very literary or it had to be very stereotypical stuff. Now, I wasn't pleased with that, but their response gave me the answers I needed. Not only were they not willing to look at any of the fantasy, I'd actually gone and prepared a whole new series, and they weren't happy with that. No matter how much we went back and forth, they kept trying to stir me towards a literary story, so they kept trying to change the goalposts, in my experience, and these were a lot of US-based publishers, so very US-type these were very US-type companies, and they were looking at something from a very US-centric view. And for me, it was absolutely fascinating because it made me realize that if you have a few companies from one country that dominate a scene, they dominate the narrative. So for me as a Nigerian, West African, you could either be literary, you could write like the others did, or you could write very stereotypical stuff, which I didn't agree with because I'd been to boarding school in the UK and I knew that it was a very dark academia setting and it was perfect for a series. And I just realized I wasn't a good fit for the industry. I couldn't fit in there. And I think in any industry, when you're not a good fit, you have to remove yourself. Don't try and keep bargaining, because what you do is you bargain away all your rights, all your identity as a writer, and all the good representation you can do for wherever you're from in the world. So what does one do when someone attempts to put them in a box? You look for other methods of connecting with readers and finding people. Not necessarily connecting with readers, but finding people who want to understand the journey of a writer and that sort of thing. So that is one of the reasons why I started a YouTube channel. And it's gone very well because I've found people who resonate. Also on social media, I found people who resonate with my writing and my books, who are trying to navigate the industry as well. And that's very, very important. The indie industry is fascinating because it's got its advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages are you can get your work seen by a lot of people, and some of the disadvantages are you have to handle all the marketing yourself. But if you're prepared to handle the marketing and you're prepared to connect with readers, it's very, very fulfilling because you're connecting real time with real people and you've cut out the middleman. However, whether you want to go traditional or indie, the traditional industry has to serve your interests. It can't all be about them because you're the one writing the stories. So just to wrap up this video, the world needs diverse writers, diverse readers, different stories from all around the world. Because if one story was always told from one point of view, not only does it get very boring, but it gives a very single point of view and it gives a very narrow viewpoint. So there is nothing else to show a contrary opinion. So my advice is to always write what you want to write. If your story is about pigs flying into space, or a dwarf living under a mountain, or a dwarf living inside a mountain, write it, because that's how you captivate people. That's how you help people escape, and that is how you use your imagination to its fullest. And just to finish off with, although the market is very oversaturated, if you are still willing to write, you will find readers, especially if your work is good and it's well written and it's well paced. You will find readers and you will leave your mark on the world. Bye.